Hey there, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. In this video, I'm going to share with you my workflow in recreating some of the soundscapes that you'll hear in The Weeknd's Call Out My Name. Now, my main objective is not to really narrow down to the exact same patch that they're using in their productions, but more or less the ear training and the mindset of how to get in that general ballpark, and using some production tips along the way to really just create some unique soundscapes that you can use on your own. So I'm going to be using the presets that you would find in Ableton Live 10, as well as sounds from a sample pack that I've put together from some of my previous projects, which you can download absolutely free just by clicking the link below in the description box. All right, let's dive right in. So at the beginning of the track, we hear this main riff that's being played throughout the song. And immediately what comes to my mind when I hear it visually is an electric piano or some kind of Rhodes that's been underwater with some, maybe even filtered out or something like that. And so that's my visualization, and I'm using that to direct what kind of plugins that I'm going to use to shape the overall tone. And so that's my thought process here. So if it feels like it's underwater or someone put a blanket over the Rhodes, then I'm most likely probably going to use a filter. And you see that there, and some delays and reverb. So let me just walk you through what exactly is going on. First, let's take a look at the riff. Now let's take a look at the sound itself. So I've gone and used the electric. Now this is a basic electric that comes with Ableton Live. I simply just clicked and dragged it into the track, and this is exactly how it loads. It really didn't do anything to alter the sound. So let's go ahead and start with listening into the sound. I'm going to bypass all the plugins that we have, and let's just listen to the sound as the original sound source. So here's the electric by itself. Alright, nothing too crazy. And what you see here are these plugins. I have the velocity, but it's not currently turned on. I was just experimenting with that. And we have the MIDI pitch plugin. So I'm using that just to go an octave lower, because when I originally played the riff at that higher octave, it just didn't sound like what I'm hearing in the reference. So an octave lower was the right range. Now what we're going to do is just add a little bit of delay. And I'm using this echo plugin in Ableton Live to give it some dimension. And what I mean by that is just a little bit stereo width, but just give it some more sonic texture here. So we're using a left and right at every 32nd note, and I switched it from the dotted, which echo usually comes by default, and switch it over to notes. So this is in sync with the project. So we have it delayed both on the left and the right side by every 32nd note. Short feedback so that the note isn't continuously playing after the signal's been processed. And then just a little bit of the reverb here, but it's set to the post, meaning that the post delay effect. And it's set to the regular stereo, not ping pong or mid side, which is such an amazing feature that the Echo has the mid side feature, which is really cool. And then just messed around with the dry and wet till I got a nice place with the sonic tone of the sound. And then here comes the big aspect of that underwater or the blanket over the Rhodes part, and that's this filter. So I just used an auto filter here from Ableton Live and just brought that directly after the echo. And that got rid of all the clangy bell type tones, but you could still hear the mallet and the Rode texture, like the actual Rode characteristics is still noticeable, as opposed to like a grand piano or another type of sound. It's still noticeable even though it's being filtered. So, but we're getting rid of all the clingy bell type of sound. And I'm using a little bit of the drive over here and set to the OSR mode, just to give a little bit more warmth and crunch. And that's what we're using this drive for. You can hear a little bit the more you crank that drive. So just left it there. And an EQ right after that. Now the purpose of this is just really to create less of the bottom end noise, which we're going to go into this reverb. So I wanted to take away any of the low end rumble that might go into this reverb. So I'm really just using the EQ for that. And then the reverb is really what creates the sonic landscape of this riff. Okay, this is what's going to create the nice atmospheric tone or texture to the electric piano. So let me just walk you through a little bit about what's going on in this reverb. Now, immediately what I'm doing is just I'm putting a lot of it. It's directly on the plugin as opposed to a send or return. And it's purposely doing that so it can create the overall atmosphere that I'm looking for. So I've got the pre-delay set to around 17.4 milliseconds, so that then you hear the note, but then you hear the reverb a little bit later, a little bit after that. So it gives it more of that haunting feel, and it's a little bit further in the back. So I want the notes to be present, but I want the reverb to just slightly come after that. I didn't want the reverb to, well, let me just go ahead and play with the pre-delay all the way down. You get to hear the difference. Right? When you're doing that, the reverb takes the limelight, and the reverb is up front, and you really miss the notes. It just becomes a little bit swirly in that case. So let's dial the pre-delay back. So now the notes are a little bit more up front, and the reverb just trails a little bit behind it. And just dial the diffusion back a little bit. So it's, if you were to picture a warehouse, and this Rhodes was in a warehouse, the more things you put in that warehouse, the less the reverb would be bouncing around all over the place. So I'm just using that's what the diffusion would be like. So I'm just lowering the diffusion just a little bit. See, when I crank it up, it smears the notes. So I want the notes to come through, and just messed around with the dry and wet for a little bit. And then, so once that riff was in place, what I did was I put a pedal plugin on my return track C. So I created a return track just by right clicking and hitting insert return track. Once I've done that, I've put the Ableton Live pedal plugin directly into that, made sure that the dry and wet was set to 100%. And I've got the gain cranked all the way, and this is set to the overdrive mode. As you can see here, doing a little bit of, a lot of mid and a little bit of treble EQing, and then another EQ here. And what I'm doing is I'm going to use this as a way to kind of blend in some harmonic distortion to this this riff that we've got. And so what I'm going to do is send a little bit of this sound to that pedal. So let's just try doing that till we get like this nice, cool harmonic distortion. And that's a tone and texture that's really noticeable in a lot of the Weeknd's type of productions. You got that nice distorted type sound, but it's what it's really distorting is the reverb and the delay and all that texture that's being ran through the pedal. And so we're just blending it till we find a really nice balance between the two. So on top of that main riff, we hear this subtle chord, just a chord stab being played by another Rhodes sample here. So here's that Rhodes sample, or the Rhodes, just another Rhodes, but this one what I'm using is, I use the old school Rhodes preset. You can go ahead and find that under electric and in piano and keys. That's what you would find here in the old school. So it chose that, and here's what we have. So what we've got going on is we have the old Rhodes, and just experimenting here with the echo once again. And let me go ahead and dial the dry and wet back a little bit. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the character in the character section of the echo. We're going to enable the noise. And what this is going to do is going to create just like some white, old vintage tape delay white noise in just faintly in the background. And I like it because it adds some really cool texture to it while the riff is playing. So what I'm doing is I'm setting it to time instead of having it sync with the project. We're going to set with time, and we're just going to tweak around till we come up with the cool delayed type vibe for the chord stabs. And lower the feedback so that it doesn't continue playing for that long. And we're using a filter again, so we can just a little bit, not so much as we did with the first riff, just basically taking away some of the high end. I had an EQ, but head and toggle around the dry and wet just to kind of get the nice atmosphere from the chord stabs. And just bring it up in volume a little bit. And what I'm going to do is, so I'm blending, I'm sending a little bit of the chord stabs to that harmonic distortion or the pedal that we set on our return track over here. So we've got these two playing the riff, so I'll bring them over here. And then what I have layered on top of that is just a white noise. So here is just a basic audio file, some white noise that is basically doing a decrescendo. You hear it and then it just decrescends into nothing, just on a 8-bar loop. So that plays, and you could hear it at the beginning of the song. We have that almost that white noise crash going on while this riff is playing. And then what I've done is I've actually tried recreating that same riff using the analog. So here I'm using the analog, which is the 2 oscillator synth, which is set to just a sine wave on both and filtered out so that we don't really hear any top end from that, and a filter and an EQ with another echo filtered out and a reverb. And so the three of them together give a nice completed texture of the main riff that I'm trying to recreate. So now I'm going to focus in on the chorus where the drums and other instrumentation come into play. Now, when it came to the drums, just listening to the reference, immediately what came to mind are vintage, old school hip hop breakbeats that had that certain grit and vinyl crackle on it. And so what I did was just navigate through my hard drive over to some of the folders that have a bunch of those type of loops. So I dragged them into my session view, and here are a couple of them. And you can hear the texture of those drums. Now, the thing to take note about this particular song is that it's actually written in 6/8. And that's the current time signature that we're in, instead of a typical 4/4 where there's 4 beats per measure and the quarter note receives that 1 beat. And all these drum loops are originally in 4/4. So what I want to do is slice the drum loop so that I can use the sounds, the kick and the snare and the hi-hat, but yet program and sequence my own rhythm. So just by simply clicking the drum file that I want, or the audio file, and hitting slice to new MIDI track, this is going to create a new MIDI track with a drum rack loaded. And what I've done was I choose to create individual slices by every transient that Ableton Live has created for that loop. So for instance, if I decided to go with every quarter note, and if the audio file is looped and warped correctly, that means that every quarter note, it would create a slice, every quarter note of the beat. So let's leave it at transient, and this is gonna allow me to create a slice for every single transient. So I hit OK, and then it will go ahead and create another MIDI track with the drum rack loaded. And you can see that here. Let me just go ahead. And I could trigger that with my MIDI controller. So once I've sliced it and I've created a drum rack, we can go ahead and now create our pattern. So when the pattern's in place, now what we can do is a little bit of layering with the drums to kind of get the same type of atmosphere that we're hearing in the record. So here with the snare, what I'm going to do is actually layer this snare with a couple sounds from the sample pack. So what I'm going to do is just while clicking the simpler, we can go ahead and right click and hit group, or just use the short key command. This is going to allow me to instantly just layer the sound with any other files I might have, and that way I don't have to create a whole nother drum rack with that separate sound. So what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead to the sample pack, Beat Academy sample pack, and let's head over here to one shots. Let's put that in there. So I'll just click and drag that right into there, and now we have the slice that we've created and the snare sample that we've loaded from the sample pack. Now the cool thing about doing it this way is that I still have just one note to see in the pattern. So I don't have to load another sample and have two snare notes here. I just one snare note here in the sequence, but yet I'm hearing two sounds layered together. So go back here and just adjust this a little bit as well. Now I'm also wanting to grab the snare from an earlier drum break, so I can just click that, drag it in here as well. And now, so we need to find the sound that we're looking for. So here is the snare, and I'm going to go and grab the end and have it placed right there. And then what we're going to do is use a reverb. Let's go to our audio section here, and let's just add a reverb directly onto that snare. So now what we're going to do is just go ahead and dial the decay time so that the decay time of that reverb doesn't play for so long. And we're going to mess around a little bit with the diffusion network, determining what frequencies of the reverb we're really going to cut away or boost. Now let's just... So when I lower the high end of that diffusion network, you can see it's like all the couches and the people or whatever's in that room that you're trying to create, or that space, they're going to take away the high end, or they're either going to take away the low end of the reverb. And so what we'll do is we'll crank a little bit of that dry and wet and lower the diffusion just a little bit. Now directly on the drums themselves, we're doing some processing with the drum bus. This is without the drum bus and without the glue compressor. It's like, hi, how are you? I'm a little drum. So we need to really beef that up, and the drum bus does a great job of doing that. So just putting the drum bus, a little bit of the drive, cranking a lot of the crunch on it. And then there's the boom feature here, which is really cool because it adds that lower sub harmonic to the low end of the drums. So there you go. And then I'm using a glue compressor, just additional more smack on there. And then a saturator. Now, one thing I actually like to do with drums like this is that I would create a return track that we see here with a simple delay or any type of delay plugin. In this case, I'm using Ableton Live Simple Delay. And I would set it to time instead of having it sync to the project. And just messing around with the milliseconds. But what I'm doing here is very short feedback, and I'm sending the drum signal to this delay. And what this does, it gives really nice sonic stereo with texture to it. So let me crank it so you can see the difference. That's without it. And then send a little bit to the... So it's really cool having that, and it just creates this nice stereo imaging with the drums there. So then what I've done is I've layered the main drum pattern with another drum rack. just nice beefy kick. And what we've done is just crank the saturator on this and have a filter on there. And so the sounds I'm using, this kick here, can be found in the sample pack. It's a jigsaw and a little folder here, and the snare as well. You can find the sample stack right there. So brought that in and then layered that with the current drum beat that we have. So after the drums are in place, we go ahead and add that 808 to just really cover the nice bottom end here. So the 808 is a subsample that also comes from the sample pack. So you can just go to the sample pack. I'm using it from the Codec Green folder. And what I've done was I've just highlighted one note. It's a sub pattern that I've played, but I just highlighted one specific note there. And let me go ahead and take all the processing off, so you just hear the. I made sure that I tuned the 808 by pitching it up 3 semitones, so that that note that I'm triggering is would be the same note when I hit the A flat and the E flat. So that's why I went up 3 semitones. Now what really gives the 808 some nice grime to it and just make it just sit really well in the mix is using this amp simulator from Ableton Live. And what this is going to do is add some really nice harmonic distortion to it. So I love the harmonic distortion that it's doing, but we don't necessarily want to hear we more or less want to feel it. So an EQ after that and shaving off a lot of the high end will get that accomplished. What we can do is just bring the release up so that the 808 has a little bit more tail when the note is released. And then I have a side chain on with a compressor, side chain to the main kick of our drum rack that we created, the first drum rack. So that every time the kick hits, the 808 just ducks out a little bit so that the kick gets a little bit of limelight, and then the 808 will still support that bottom end, but it will get out of the way of the mix and then come right back up. So let's hear what we have with the keys and the drums. So it's not bad, but now what we're going to do is incorporate a snare drum, and we're going to really saturate, just accent a lot of the reverb. So here's a snare that I've found from the sample pack. It's a loop. Just like a nice beefy snare. I've just dragged that loop right into the session view. And just put the reverb directly on it. Once the drums and 808 are in place, I decided to use an analog and just set it to sawtooth on both oscillators and just filtered it out. And I'm using this more of a pad just to add some more texture to the chorus section here. Just filtering, using the filter to take away all the high end, setting it about maybe 275. And a reverb directly on there. And as you can notice, the common theme here is reverb, right? Reverb's really creating that smearing atmospheric tone and vibe. It's such a great way to send tones and sounds further back in the mix, and this is very evident as well with the Weeknd's vocal performance too. It's drenched in reverb, and not just one but several to create that dimension. So that's what we're creating here with the instrumentation as well. And then what I'm going to do is have one of those breakbeats that we have here, and let's go ahead and solo this. As I mentioned, this drum break was originally recorded at 4/4. That's the time signature. So I'm just basically making sure that it's more of a feel or type thing let alone as the actual foreground beat. So I'm going to have this playing with the current drums. And that's okay if the snare isn't actually hitting where my drum snare is hitting. This is going to actually just be somewhat in the background, so it won't actually be as present as our snare. So it gives a nice little feel to it in the background. Now, I hope this video has been helpful for you in creating some of the soundscapes that you hear on records like this. Just remember, a little bit of delay and reverb go a long way. Now, I have a gift for you for watching this video. I'd love to send you the sample pack that I've been featuring throughout this video with some of the sounds that you've heard, and it's yours absolutely free. And it's filled with construction kits and loops and transition effects and one-shots, and this is 100% royalty free, meaning that you can use it in your projects right now. So just simply click the link below in the description box, or you can visit www.beatacademy.com/pack, and you can download this absolutely free today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.